Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial Group, Rydan Investments, and Encore Business Group. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights 7 to 9 Eastern on Jethro.fm.
We're going to talk some Tigers here. This is Ashley Couturier. I'm hoping I got close on that. It's a tough one. She's going to correct me if I'm wrong, but she writes for the Tigers Minor League Report. Anybody that follows the show knows I'm a big fan of their whole operation. So this will be her first time on the show, and we're happy to get her on. So welcome to the show, Ashley.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
No problem. How'd I do on the name? Did I do okay?
You did perfect. Yes, you did perfect.
Excellent. Okay.
You did better than everybody who's ever tried it.
Oh, wow.
On the first go.
Okay. All right. We are off to a hot start here, Rex. I like it. Okay.
You are.
So what's your favorite hoagie then? Do you have a favorite hoagie?
I'm going to have to go with the Philly cheesesteak. I'm a big fan of Philly as a city in general. I have a lot of friends there, and I've had a lot of good Philly cheesesteaks, so I'm going to go with that.
Okay. I like it. Okay. Yeah, we share that one. That's a pretty good one. I bet you didn't think we were going to start with your favorite hoagie for this interview. We'll get into some baseball here. There's a lot of baseball to talk. They're off today, but they had a great game last night. They've been winning series after series, and it's just been a fun team. I'm curious kind of what your main focus is. You like to get into a lot of the analytics, but just as a way of starting off, one of the things I'm interested in, I like that it's a big kind of redemption arc season for some of the key players, because I was thinking about how, obviously some people were a little disappointed that they missed out on Bregman in the off season, and they still added Torres, but it's like they got Javi Baez as a free agent acquisition with how he's playing this year. Then you get Torque playing the way he is, and Mize pitching the way he is. That's a lot of found money from guys that were previous investments that weren't necessarily paying off, but they sure are this year.
Yeah, I can say, Javi Baez, Zach McKinstry I've always liked, but he's looking like a rich man's Kike Hernandez this year, which is really, really cool to see. I feel like all his numbers are up. Torque obviously is doing a lot better, and Casey Mize is doing a lot better. So we got two of our first-round picks back.
Yeah, it's fun to see them producing the way I was talking with some of the guys. I think I mentioned this to Rogelio when he was on before the season, and I was talking with him about how I thought this was a perfect season for Torque and Mize, because they're and I guess Baez was kind of in the same boat. They don't have the pressure on them that they had in previous seasons. They just have to be a guy. They don't have to be the guy. Mize has to be the fourth starter. Torque barely made the opening day roster, with arguably without the injuries he may not have. And so it's nice to see them fitting in so well and being some of the drivers on the team. But I'm curious who you have your eye on. I know you like to follow a lot of the analytics. So who are some of the players that have kind of stuck out to you, either at the major or minor league level?
So starting off, looking at the minor leagues, Bryce Rayner has been really impressive. I feel like he follows kind of like how the Tigers like to draft. He's a lefty. He's a shortstop, so premium position guy, up the middle guy, out of high school. I actually am working on kind of like a draft preview for Tigers Minor League Report right now. And so I've been kind of looking at some of the guys that are available and researching, what the Tigers usually follow. And they like lefties, they like up the middle guys, and they like high schoolers, and they like big, tall guys with a lot of projection. And that's exactly what Bryce Rayner is. 6'3", 195 he's listed at. I'm sure, he's probably put on a little bit of muscle since then, but he still has a lot of projection left. He's got double plus raw power. He keeps up the contact. I think it can translate to in-game slug, which is really nice. He's got a really good arm. He's got like a double plus arm. And then just to start, he's off to the exit velocities we've seen well over 100. I think he's reached, I believe, 112 just off the top of my head. He's got hits in 8 out of 9 games. I think he's got like 3 multiple hit games. And he's got an 821 OPS already. think Bryce Rayner is fascinating. I think he's really fun. I think when he was drafted, I think he had revamped his swing because if I remember right, back in high school, he had quite a bit of in-zone swing and miss, but he kind of revamped the swing. He worked on that, and they, like, Major League Baseball's website has his hit tool at a 55, which is interesting because that's higher than I had kind of heard about when he was, just like a draft before he got drafted. So I'm super excited about him. I think he's a really high ceiling guy, and I'm excited to follow, what he continues to do through the minor leagues.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot on him lately too. It seems like you're not the only one that's high on him, and I think he hit on a good point there because it seems like he's got the 6'3" frame that you were talking about. He's only 195 pounds. You alluded to this, Ashley, but it seems like once he moves up and gets more time in the system, I'm sure they'll add some bulk, which will inevitably help him, especially with the power there.
Yeah, I mean, at 19 years old, he has not grown into his man body yet. I haven't actually seen him in person, but from just watching the Lakeland games, just kind of the eye test, I definitely think he has projection left. I mean, 19 years old, 6'3", 195, I'm sure he could add a good 10, 15 pounds.
I don't know if you follow basketball, Ashley, but he just needs to talk to Jalen Duren, and then he'll be okay here. He'll beef up if he talks to him because he's about the same age. He's only a year or two older, and he's got a grown man body for sure. But yeah, so I know you follow a lot of the minor leagues for Tigers Minor League Report, but do you specialize in one of the levels, or do you just kind of bounce around?
I just kind of bounce around. I've kind of recently been getting more into like amateur scouting and that scope of things. So looking at like the lower level prospects and the guys who are going in the draft is really interesting to me. But then obviously, we have exciting prospects in Erie. I'm really high on Tyrone Lorenzo. Ever since he hit that, I think it was like a 114 exit velocity home run in the Stars game last year for the Fall League. I've been super high on him. I know not everybody's super high on his defense, but he's been working on it. I think he's more likely to stick behind the plate than Jose Briseño. I actually was just at West Michigan a couple weeks ago. Unfortunately, Briseño had the day off, but I did get to see Max Clark. Max Clark looks really good. His eye is really good. I think he makes really good swing decisions. And he's just tooled up anyway, so that was good to see. Let me think. And like I said, Erie has a lot of exciting prospects. I pay attention to the Toledo guys. I go to Toledo every now and then. So I would say, honestly, every level I pay attention to.
Yeah, we're here in West Michigan, and I want to check out a game. I haven't been there. They're a sponsor of the other show on our network, and I have some friends in the organization, and I want to especially go see Kenny Serwa pitch, in addition to seeing Max Clark and some of the guys that most likely won't be there by the end of the season here.
Yeah, Kenny Serwa is an exciting one. I've been reading up on him lately, and I knew he had the 90-mile-per-hour knuckleball that he throws, but then I think he has like a slower knuckleball that he throws too. He's got two different knuckleballs. His numbers so far, I think he's got like a 3 and some change ERA and a whip under 1 right now. I think he's going to move through the system fast. Obviously, I think he played some independent league ball, and he's 27 at this point in high A. And he's kind of been killing it. So I'm excited to see him. Hopefully you can get to a game and see him, but I think he'll move through the system faster than a lot of other guys.
Yeah, I assume so. I know you guys do a lot of scouting, like you're talking about, and follow the minor leagues very well. How do you think that he made it through? Because he's such a unique player with that fastball knuckleball that he's got, and then knuckleball pitchers are unique to begin with. But he made it. Usually people are on guys like this pretty young. How did he make it to 27 without kind of getting noticed more? I know he got discovered with that video by the Tigers, but I in the modern day where there's video on everything, I'm surprised that somebody didn't pick this guy up sooner.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't have an answer to that question. I'm really not sure. I don't know his history before he signed with the Tigers. Like you said, I know they got him off of that video, and I know he aligns with what the Tigers like. They like outliers. They like guys with something different. Obviously, they're more prone to, especially in the draft, like lefties over righties, and this guy's a righty. But I've noticed their pattern when they look at righties, they look at guys who are outliers. And he's definitely an outlier with that knuckleball. So I can see definitely why the Tigers liked him and jumped on him. I'm sure Chris Sutter's very excited as well.
Oh yeah, he's got to be chomping at the bit to work with somebody like that, because you just don't see that. I mean, it's funny because the knuckleball is very unique, and like you said, you don't see that kind of thing, especially this faster knuckleball, very often. But I'm surprised. I remember somebody, I forget who this was, but they were talking about how they wanted to train people in the knuckleball because that could be a faster way to get to the major leagues if you don't necessarily have that arm strength, because obviously a lot of guys don't have the 95 plus that you need to get to the big leagues now. And so then, you teach the knuckleball, but I don't know the mechanics behind it. You'd have to go back to the days of like the Necros, Phil and Joe Necro, to figure
Tim
that
Wakeman,
out. Yeah.
Charlie Huff.
Yeah. Tim Wakefield.
Wakefield.
Yeah. And so it's interesting that we're now going to have this guy, and I'm curious if he's going to create a little bit of buzz, because when Wakefield, he was kind of the last one that I can remember anyways, when he was doing it, that created a little buzz, but it was like it didn't create any young knuckleballers.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Like I think I've just seen a lot of buzz with him, like in the news lately. He's all over Baseball America. He's all over Twitter. You've seen him on Pitching Ninja. And I feel like the things that are kind of, what do I want to say, like trendy, kind of changes throughout the year. So maybe it's time to bring the knuckleball back. I mean, I know like sinkers just recently came back. I know cutters are a big thing right now. So yeah, maybe he kind of starts the trend and they start, trying to teach that again.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. We got to take a quick break, Ashley, but after the break, I want to talk about a guy that you did a profile on for the Tigers Minor League Report, who has kind of an interesting arm slot and a unique delivery in Chase Lee, who we've seen a little bit more of than I thought we would so far. So we'll pick up with Ashley after the break. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back with Ashley here of Tigers Minor League Report. I wanted to talk to you about Chase Lee, because I know you guys are kind of splitting up the profiles here, and I like reading those profiles that you do on the top 46, which I've complained to every Tigers Minor League Report person about the number, so I won't do that with you, Ashley. I'll save it for the other guys. But I'm curious on your take on Chase Lee. We've seen him; he's got a good story. We've seen him more this season, and I have to imagine it maybe is because he gives something a little different out of the bullpen here.
Oh, yeah. Like I said, the Tigers are big on outliers. And Chase Lee, and I think he's got that a -2, according to Baseball Savant. He's got a -2 arm angle, which obviously is very unique. It's an outlier, kind of the, sinker slider guy, or sinker sweeper guy, rather. I mean, he did really well for us in the big leagues. He, has a 0 ERA. Got 4 strikeouts in 4.1 innings. I'm a fan of Chase Lee. I think he's really exciting. Like I said, he adds something different, and that's what the Tigers like.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch him out there, because I was talking with my stepdad the other day about the Tigers, and he was talking about how seeing the evolution of the pitchers and seeing how they may not seem it, but there's a lot of obviously they have to have a lot of weight in their legs typically. Guys like Chase Lee and Tyler Owens, they have a little different delivery, but they still generate a lot of speed and movement on their pitches. So it's fun to see these guys that aren't necessarily the classic pitcher body, but they still get out there and get it done here.
Yeah, I mean, that arm angle that he has definitely adds to the deception, and he's so, with that arm angle would explain why his sweeper gets like 24 inches of rake. So I can definitely see why he gets a lot of chase. And again, how that just adds to the deception. It's an outlier, and it's a big add to the bullpen, especially if you're using a lot of guys in the bullpen. They're seeing a lot of different things. Obviously that adds to deception as well. So yeah, he's very exciting.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you something, Ashley, that I've been wondering for a little while. I was a big baseball fan, and then I kind of tuned out for a little while. I've been getting back into it, especially after last year, and we cover it for the show. And Tigers Minor League Report has been a big help with that. When I was watching baseball, I don't remember ever hearing of a sweeper, and now I hear it all the time, and I don't understand. I know it's a pitch with movement, but I don't understand why we added a pitch there that to the mix here with all the other ones, the slider and the other pitches with movement.
Right. So I think a sweeper is just a variation of a slider. Some sliders are the faster ones are very similar to cutters. That's kind of how Tarek Skubal's fastball. It stays on the same plane. Slider stays on the same plane as his fastball, and it cuts. Or like Luis Castillo for the Seattle Mariners. He's got that gyro slider that doesn't really. It's not a lot of induced movement, but then the sweeper just kind of sweeps across the plate, and it's usually a lot slower. So again, I think a sweeper has always been a thing, but I think just recently it started being kind of differentiated from just a regular slider.
See, when I was watching baseball, Luis Castillo was the second baseman for the Florida Marlins. Now they're the Miami Marlins, and now he's a pitcher for a different team that throws a sweeper. So I fell asleep.
For a pretty good team, too.
Yeah,
the Mariners
exactly.
are coming along pretty well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and he's a good pitcher, too. But yeah, so I'm glad you clarified that a little bit. But, yeah, I want to go back to some of the prospects you were talking about, because I haven't talked about one of the names, because you guys obviously – research all this stuff together, so there's some names that kind of get aggregated a little bit within your group, and one that I haven't gotten an update on for a while is Lorenzo. So you've been following him pretty well here, and it sounds like he's gotten off to the start to the season that you guys expected.
I mean, yeah, Double A is where a lot of your more difficult pitching is going to be. So I can definitely see why he would be getting off to kind of a slower start. I think he's only got a 638 OPS right now. When he came over from the Dodgers, he increased his walk rate and he decreased his strikeout rate. That was in high A. And then he went to the fall league and he absolutely tore up the fall league. He and Briseño were obviously the stars of the fall league. And then he got moved up he started the season in Double A. And again, that's where the more difficult pitching is going to be. So obviously it's going to be an adjustment for him. He still is walking. I think his walk rate right now is up to like 18.6% or something like that. Tyrone Lorenzo is an interesting one. His profile is interesting because he's a switch hitting catcher. Who's really good from both sides of the plate. Like I said, he's still working on the defense. I know a lot of people aren't super high on the defense, but he has thrown out a lot of people this year. I think he's at like 3 or 4 maybe now. I don't look at it every day, but I still look at it. I think his strikeout rate though is the problem. He's at like a 37% K rate this year, which again, obviously, it's going to be an adjustment to the Double A pitching, but that's definitely going to be a point of concern for him.
Yeah, especially because plate discipline is such a focus, especially at the major league level. You can see a renewed focus on it this year. That's been one of the most impressive things to me of some of the guys that we're talking about at the major league level. Obviously, the improvement from some of the guys that previously may have not been as strong, like Baez and Torkelson. You mentioned McKinstry. Those guys have had great plate discipline, so they'll be valuing that for the guys coming up in the system. It's always nice to have a catcher coming up behind the other guys, too, because it's been nice to see the progression. Rogers obviously got hurt. That's a big loss, especially from a clubhouse standpoint and a leadership standpoint. But Dingler's filled in nice, and Nito has looked good as well. But it's nice to have some talent backing them up. So hopefully he can potentially stay behind there as the next guy up once he's ready.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I said, I think he is more apt to stay at the catching position rather than Josue Briseño. Brissingham is just big. He's big guy, especially if you've seen him in West Michigan. And I think he's going to be kind of more of the first baseman. But yeah, so we have Lorenzo. I know we have Enrique Jimenez, who's in the rookie league right now. I believe those are the only two. I mean, not the only two pitching prospects, but like the ones that the Tigers are really high on right now. But yeah, I think they're really high on Lorenzo. And as long as I know he's been training a lot with Brian Pena, he worked with him, through the fall league. He worked with him through the off season. He's worked with him this year. So he's, obviously a really good catching mentor to have. I think as long as he can kind of try to control the zone better, try to make better swing decisions, and he's a guy too. He's not going to be, a contact. I don't think he's ever going to be a contact hitter. He's never going to be a Victor Martinez who's going to hit for average. I think he sells out a little bit of that contact for power, and in a catchers aren't usually 300 hitters anyway. So I'll take that, but he definitely needs to lower that K rate, which, I'm sure the Tigers are so big on that anyway as an organization. Hopefully he can be coachable. And again, it's so early in the year. Double A is definitely going to be an adjustment for him. So I'm excited to see how he kind of progresses through the season.
Well, and you make a good point, Ashley, about the catcher spot in the lineup isn't notoriously going to be, occasionally they are, but it's not usually going to be your best hitter. It's not going to be the guy that you're building your lineup around. But if they do have some pop and it's a bat that you have to at least avoid the big home run ball, especially with a couple people on base as you work into the back end of the lineup, I agree with you. That's a little bit more of a threat than, hey, this guy will slap something out into right and maybe get a single. No, you want some pop from that position. And as long as they can reduce those strikeouts like they have with several people that we've talked about in the interview so far, hopefully that can be something that sticks for him.
I mean, yeah, up the middle guys like that, you're lucky if you get somebody who has contact and power. You get somebody who's super tooled up. Like looking up the middle defense is where, it's very important, which again, like that's Lorenzo's going to have to work on that defense behind the plate still. And I think he's going to have to kind of watch. He's already a big guy, so that's definitely something he's going to have to watch is, the body, make sure he stays healthy, make sure he's eating well, make sure he's working out. But, like you said, catchers in the pop, shortstop, looking again at like Bryce Rayner, he's not so much your contact hitter, he's more of your power hitter. Looking in the middle at center field, they're usually really good defenders, super athletic guys, usually got a little bit of pop, but they're not always those contact hitters. That's obviously like your first base profile, your third base profile. But, everybody, that's the nice thing about the Tigers organization is I feel like they assign everybody a role, and as long as everybody can play that role and not try to do too much, they see success.
Ashley, to cap off this great analysis you've been providing for us, who are some likely candidates that you might see possibly moving up to the Tigers roster this season, or who might be used as trade capital?
That's a really good question. I think that really depends on if we continue kind of the pace that we're on. Because obviously last year we kind of sold at the deadline, whereas this year I'm not so sure we're going to do that with the start that we're off at. So right. I think, we're going to have to continue to kind of monitor how the team does. I think with Matt Vierling coming at, we're already off to a good start. Matt Vierling coming up, hopefully Parker Meadows coming back sometime in the summer. We're going to continue to do well. I think this year, honestly, we'll probably be looking at more buying. But as far as guys who are going to come up, so I'm a big Tiger Montero fan. I obviously he's got his issues. He's got his command issues that he has to continue to work on. And, he's getting a little, he's not old, but he's a little, getting a little bit older. So I feel like, he can help us out on the big league roster. But I'm not sure if he's going to be kind of like, a permanent piece. I definitely think Hao-Yu Lee we're going to see sometime this year. I can see him coming up maybe when we expand the rosters in September. Maybe even possibly before that, I'm not sure. But I mean, he's been really good in Toledo. He's been raking in Toledo. I think think his OPS has dipped a little bit, but assuming he started the season in AAA, I think he got off to a really good start. I know we saw him play a little bit of third during spring training. I could see Jace Young honestly being a trade candidate, and this is just kind of like a wild guess. I could see him being a trade candidate, and I could see how Lee coming up and maybe possibly playing a little bit of third base. Again, that's just kind of, a rough prediction. But yeah, how Lee's another one who I'm really excited about. I like the tools. I like the hit tool. Defensively, he showed that, he can play second base. He can play third base. So he's somebody who I definitely think that we'll see sometime this year, especially if he continues doing well in Toledo.
That's an interesting answer, Ashley. I wouldn't have expected a third baseman, especially a young one like that, no pun intended, to be the answer to that. But you did get a Hyu Lee reference in, and I think in my at least half a dozen interviews with the Tigers minor league report, I think he's the only player that's been mentioned every time. So we were contractually obligated, I think, to get it in. So I'm glad we got it in under the wire. But that's all great stuff. We appreciate you coming on and giving us that detailed analysis. And hopefully we'll check back in with you as the season goes on here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Good. It was great stuff. And we got a long season, so hopefully we'll have you back on later in the season. But we appreciate you joining the show.
Yes, of course. Thank you. I'm excited to kind of do a look back next time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll see how it progresses, but they're off to a good start. And like you said, the reinforcements are coming. So thanks, Ashley. We'll talk to you next time.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Take care. All right. Thanks to Ashley Couturier. That was great stuff. And I think I said her name right again, hopefully, but we're going to turn our attention to basketball. We unfortunately lost the Pistons from the playoffs, but they had a great series. And we're going to have Bryce Simon come on and of the Pistons Pulse podcast and take us through that. And we're going to ask him what his favorite hoagie is. So stick with us.
I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah, well, yours is until the end, Rex. You just you take the rest of the show here. But
we're going to the pressure off.
We're going to find out Bryce's after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. We're happy to bring on Bryce Simon here of the Pistons Pulse podcast and other things. The alliteration always gets me there. Now we had a big season here, Bryce. And I know we're disappointed they're out of the playoffs, but I'm going to throw you a curve here. I want to know what your favorite hoagie is.
I don't even know what that means, Ryan. You definitely threw me for a curveball here.
Join the club. He's so obsessed with these hoagies right now. They're like a submarine sandwich. I think he's just hungry and didn't eat before the show. I'm sorry.
At the beginning of the show, Bryce, we look up what national day it is, and it's National Hoagie Day, which, like Rex said, is like a warm sub sandwich. And I surprised him by asking him what his favorite hoagie is. He's working on that for the end of the show. So I figured I'd ask you at the beginning so you can think about it for the end of the interview here, because that's a big question. But yeah, no, we were just throwing you a curve here. But no, we're excited to talk some hoops with you because you're one of our favorites to do that. You have some great breakdowns on there. And I know we're disappointed that they're out, but this was still some great bonus basketball here.
Yeah, it was incredible. And I think, listen, you want them to win the series, right? Like that's the hope whenever you get into the playoffs is they win the series and they be playing tonight against the Celtics, right? Like that's what you want. But seeing that team take the Knicks to 6 games where every game was crazy competitive and how many ever games went down to the last second and just an opportunity to evaluate Cade Cunningham in those scenarios and Asar Thompson, Jalen Duren, and on down the line. I said my 2 biggest disappointments, I guess, from this season were the Jaden Ivey injury where we didn't get a chance to see him in those playoff games or even throughout most of the season, right? And that they unfortunately lost all 3 games at LCA. Like that was probably the biggest disappointment of the series for me. It was great to see him win 2 at Madison Square Garden, but unable to, end the home losing streak and get a playoff win for the home crowd. But I think that'll happen in the near future. But yeah, just an incredible season that went way beyond my expectations, guys.
Oh yeah, and I don't think anybody could have reasonably expected anything like this. I mean, we talked towards the beginning of the season, and we were hoping for maybe something in the 30s as far as a win total goes. And so they're way ahead of schedule. But this is one of the things that I wanted to ask you. So I don't want to necessarily jump ahead. We'll still talk about this series and some of the things that you found interesting. But one of the things that's interesting to me is there is a lot of hope here. And you mentioned the Jaden Ivey thing. My favorite part of sports is the team building aspect, the managerial aspect. And it's interesting because, you know, they are way ahead of schedule. They got veterans that fit. I would say pretty much, I don't know, I'll ask you this, Bryce, and get your take because you watch all the players and break them all down. Is there anybody that you think played below whatever the reasonable expectation was for them at the beginning of the year? Because I feel like that, I feel like I don't know if I can name one, and not just trying to be positive about the players, but I feel like everybody overachieved from what we thought here.
Yeah, we actually did a whole episode of this on the Pistons Pulse, and I reached out to a bunch of people. I said, hey, like, rank, you know, the level of, like, essentially exceeding expectations, because most players did, you know. So did you think Malik Beasley exceeded expectations by the most, or was it Isaiah Stewart, or was it Asar or Kate or whatever? The person that came in last between the 8 names that I gave out was Simone Fontecchio. Simone, for me, was the only player this season that didn't, you know, meet the expectations I had. And maybe my expectations were just unreasonable based off what we saw from Simone coming over at last year's trade deadline. But in general, whenever we always talk in the offseason, well, if this guy gets better and this guy gets better and this guy gets better, and it's always like, yeah, but not every one of those guys is going to do that. This year, it did seem like that happened. Malik Beasley had a career year. Cade improved. Asar improved once he got back. Jalen Duren got better. And it's just really a testament to the organization, J.B. Bickerstaff, and obviously the players who are the ones putting in the work and, you know, playing between the lines every night.
Simone's a good answer. I did like what he contributed this year, but I think that's a good answer as far as I think we were hoping for a little bit more scoring, especially from deep. I would have liked to have seen a little bit of a shot tweak for him. I'm a bit of a shooting purist, and so when the form is not quite as pure, I like a reversion back to that. I know with some guys that works, but with him it seems too flat to me. It doesn't seem like he gets enough air underneath the ball, and I thought with Vincent in maybe that would change a little bit, but it was still fairly flat and therefore very streaky. Typically when he was going pretty good, and when he was off, he was pretty far off. But that's interesting that you bring him up, because I feel like when I try to think of what to build on for next year, because like you said, there's a lot of young guys on this team that should continue to take a step up here, hopefully in the offseason. You're adding Ivy back into the mix, and you got to find some space for him. So if that's kind of losing Hardaway and saying, hey, we can't, we appreciate how you played, but we can't re-sign you and give you this many minutes. I think there needs to be maybe some 3-and-D guy behind Tobias Harris that eventually can replace him, and hopefully the existing 3-and-D guys can develop. But I'm wondering what you see as kind of the progression there. Do you see Asar moving to the 4? Because I was thinking about this earlier today when I was trying to kind of fantasy book this situation for the next year, that once he adds a little bit more weight with his length and everything, does he move to the 4 to replace Tobias to clear out room for Ivy when he comes back, and Holland if he eventually develops into a starter? I'm curious to see how that'll develop here, because they do need some reinforcements on the bench, especially at 4 for the rotation if they don't re-sign Fontecchio.
Yeah, I agree, and that's what, I know a lot of Pistons fans will scream at me when I don't bring up Bobby Clinton in this situation. I would just say, I know we played G League. We saw one substantial game. It was a good game. You brought the video breakdowns. I broke down the game, so if anybody listening wants to check it out, over on the Motor City Hoops Substack, I broke down, Bobby Clinton's game in that game, but it wasn't even a true NBA game by standards. Both teams were resting guys in that one. I go back and forth with Asar. Here's my issue with Asar being the true 4 is then it kind of pigeonholes the matchups he has to take. And I think the idea of Tobias or a Tobias archetype is then you have a little bit more versatility with the star being able to take perimeter matchups. If he's your 4, then he kind of has to take those forwards and stuff like that, and then you can't put him on a guard like Jalen Brunson because he's having to defend OG Anunoby because nobody else on the team is big enough to do it. Or if you're playing the Timberwolves, he has to guard Julius Randle as opposed to Anthony Edwards because nobody else in the starting lineup has the physicality to match Julius Randle, right? Like, so, and maybe I'm pigeonholing or picking the right matchups to make that, but that would be a little bit of my concern is not having that archetype, like a true 4-man, which I think Tobias is. Jeremy Grant was that as well. They hadn't had one since Jeremy Grant was traded. I do think finding that type of player would be good. And so it is interesting to see what Trajan will do this offseason because they can go a multitude of ways this offseason with salary cap space, bringing guys back, trying to upgrade, all of those different things. That's going to make it a really interesting offseason to see what he decides.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about the switchability and I have to make the point, we're not trying to move Harris out of his current role. I like him in his role, and he played some great defense, especially on Karl Anthony Towns in the playoffs.
I was some support.
Yeah, I was very impressed. But yeah, kind of in the next man up standpoint, somebody that can learn under Tobias and then fill in for him when he's eventually not on the team, which hopefully isn't anytime soon because
I give him some rest.
Yeah,
someone to switch up with.
Yeah, and then eventually take over for him when he's no longer on the team. But I think that's a good point about Thompson because that's one of the true advantages to the way this lineup is built, that because Cade is such a big point guard and Thompson is so switchable, you have a lot of flexibility where there's not a lot of matchups that look crazy on the Detroit side of things. Sometimes they look a little odd on the other side when they're trying to defend some of these taller players. But yeah, Thompson being able to guard a Brunson and then Cade being able to move down to small forward is a huge advantage here.
Yeah, and so think about that. Let's just use this year's team for example. If you're starting Cade, Jaden Ivey, Tim Hardaway Jr., Asar, all of a sudden you're kind of small, right? And so I just think you would run into matchups that would be interesting. So to your guys' point, maybe it's just simple as we need a guy that can do it, right? That against certain matchups he can come in and play the 4. And I'm with both. I thought Tobias had a good year. It was solid. He is getting a little bit older. He's not the long-term answer, I think, is the reason for this conversation. And where this team has sped up the process and where they're at because of the season they had, you have to start thinking about those things now. Even if it's not next year where you need that starting 4-man or the guy to play some minutes there, you might need to acquire him this offseason so that he's ready to step in the next year. The other thing I always like to bring up with the Star, and this is important because of what is coming this offseason with the extension eligibility for Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey, is you have to kind of decide a little bit if you think Asar and Jalen Duren are long-term fits next to each other, because that determines what you're willing to offer Jalen Duren on an extension this offseason. If you don't think those guys can be in a starting lineup together for the next 5 years, well, that's going to change the number you offer him. If you do, well, then obviously you're going to be willing to offer him some more. So it's not just what they think about Jalen Duren, it's because they're both non-shooters in a starting lineup, what do you think about those two guys together long-term?
And I think that's the natural progression of that discussion. We have to take a quick break, but I want to pick up there after the break because I think that's interesting talking about the extensions there, and that's why that 4 is so key in between being able to shoot and kind of break that up. But we're going to come back with Bryce Simon in just a minute. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Bryce Simon. He's led a nice discussion here about the Pistons and potential offseason plans. We're curious of your take here, Bryce, because you were talking about the Thompson and Duren fit. I've seen some very good things. I feel like Duren has some playmaking ability that can work well with Thompson. There's some good cutting that was going on by the end of the season, and then Thompson's defensive switchability can help. But like you said, there's the overlap of not being able to shoot the 3. Hopefully Asar can improve on that. But what are your thoughts? You watch a lot of the film and break that down. Is that something that you feel like is a good fit, or do you think there's a change that needs to be made there?
I'm in between right now. I have concerns. We've seen times where it looked just fine, and specifically when you get Cade and Duren in the pick and roll, and then Asar can cut off the ball, or if you get Asar involved in the action. The problem is when they're both off the ball. So if you want to run any other sort of action involving the other three players, they like to occupy the same space. They're like magnets to each other off the ball because their mentality is the same of where they want to cut and where they want to make themselves available for an offensive rebound or a dump off or a lob or whatever. And so that is my concern with it. It's not when they're getting out in transition. They're both fine there because they're athletic, they're play finishers, they're offensive rebounders. It's not even necessarily when one is involved in the action because, like you mentioned, Jalen Duren is a very good passer. It's when you want to run actions that don't involve one of them, which at times you want to do, and then they end up in the same space. And so I'm not saying it can't work. Like, I don't want to be negative here. I'm just saying it's part of the equation, and that conversation is happening right now because you have to make a decision on Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey. And that decision is going to speak to them. If you don't offer them an extension at all, well, obviously that's going to send a message to them. Or if you offer them a number that's too low, or, what if you go way overboard and it ends up being a bad contract? So I personally think the most important decisions Trajan makes this offseason are what he does with those extensions with J.I. and J.D.
And I want to get to the Jaden Ivey piece here in a second, but that's interesting what you're saying. I'm curious. So because Duren has played well, there's no question. We're in but they can't be evaluated in a vacuum, which is essentially what you're saying. And like when you put out the poll, hey, how's everybody doing? He was definitely one of the ones that was above the reasonable expectation. But I guess my question would go to if they do replace him being a more back to the basket center. Obviously there's more versatile centers nowadays in the current NBA landscape, but what do you then get? Because then now you have to acquire somebody that is going to go next to Asar a little bit better. And what does that look like? I imagine you're going to say somebody that steps out a little bit more, but with the way Bickerstaff values defense, that's going to be tough to find somebody that's both of those things. And what's the cost to acquire that?
That's the caveat, right? Because if you're Trajan, maybe you go, you know what? I don't think this fit is perfect, but are we going to do better than this? Like, are we going to do better than Jalen Duren's rebounding, improved defense, play finishing? Because, listen, Miles Turner is the name that everybody loves, and I understand why. Because he spaces the floor, he provides some defense. His big limitation is he's not a great defensive rebounder, but, like, that's the name. He is an unrestricted free agent this offseason, but Detroit would have to maneuver some things, even to have the cap space, guys, to sign him. They would have to essentially renounce the rights to Hardaway Jr., Schroeder, Beasley, and maybe even do some others, like trade away Fontecchio for nothing in return, essentially, just to get to the number to maybe sign him if Indiana would even consider letting him go, or if he would even consider leaving Indiana, I guess is a better way of phrasing it. These type of bigs don't grow on trees, right? We know that's why they're so valuable. And so it's a great point that I can sit here and say, like, hey, maybe I think a different archetype of center would be better next to Asar, but that's a very rare archetype to find in this league.
Well, and the thing with Duren, too, is one of the things that surprised me, I even made a reference to him in the last interview that was about baseball, because they were talking about a young man that was 19 and that was going to likely grow into his body. When JD showed up, he had a grown man build from day one.
Yeah.
But what surprised me was his playmaking ability. I feel like that has been on display as the season has gone on, especially this year. And I'm wondering how much that helps the equation. Does that put him in the high post a little bit more? I don't want to suggest that he's going to be able to move out and be able to shoot the three. That's too far of a leap. But can he develop a 15-foot Udonis Haslem type jumper that I know he's not the best free throw shooter, but his form looks okay. Can they add pieces to his game that will help with that spacing and change that instinct set for both of them, so it puts them in different spots on the floor?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point because, listen, if both of those guys didn't have passing potential, I would very adamantly be telling you I don't think that they can work together offensively. The fact that JD has shown some of that passing, the fact that Asar has shown it as well, a little bit more so in transition than in the half court. But the other thing we have to remember with Asar is he didn't get an off season, and these off seasons are important to individual and personal growth for somebody in the NBA because you're not getting a whole lot of that in regular season, right? You're not getting a whole bunch of individual practices and stuff like that because you're playing so many games. So who knows what Asar's offensive game will look like next year after a full off season. I don't expect him to be knocking down threes in the next few years. I think that's more of a very long-term thing. But in the same way with him, if he can dribble into a 12-foot jumper, if he can continue to grow his passing, if Jalen Duren can continue to, hone in his passing, those guys working off of each other in a way. And when you can put the ball in one of their hands, it makes the spacing work a little bit better. Again, I think the biggest issue is when they're both out of the action. And so the fact they both can pass a little bit is a reason that gives me hope that it could work together.
And obviously there's the argument that you could possibly change the rotation up, but I do like both of their spots in the rotation, so that would be kind of tough. At one point for a future interview, I want to talk about some of these archetypes because I like how you're talking about the archetypes of NBA players, and I've found that interesting how that's changed. And I was thinking about the 3-and-D archetype. This is the kind of stuff I do in my free time, Bryce. I'm sure you can relate to that. But I was thinking of the archetype of the 3-and-D guy and how there's not a lot of young. I remember a comedian saying once that you never see any baby pigeons. Where are the baby pigeons? There's no young 3-and-D guys. Where are the young 3-and-D guys? Asar is a great defender, but he doesn't have the 3-point piece yet. It's like we get these guys that end up fitting in on teams like a Dorian Finney-Smith or a Derek Jones, guys like that they grow into a 3-and-D guy. They don't necessarily start there. They have to grow into the other piece, and it's hard to do that at the beginning of their careers.
It's crazy. I told someone this the other day. Everybody complains about the amount of three-pointers taken and how the three-point shot is dominating the NBA, and it's like, why are I do NBA draft stuff, right? And it's amazing when we go through a mock draft or something like that, and it's the number of players where we say the jump shot is the X factor, the jump shot is the X factor, the jump shot is the X factor, or if he had a jump shot, he would be this. It's crazy. It's just amazing to me that we're not just developing an insane amount of shooters in this country and across the world, right? It's a sport that spans the entire globe. Whenever the NBA is, the Celtics are playing right now, who knows how many threes they've shot probably here in the first half. I haven't got a chance to watch it yet, but it is crazy how many players don't have that coming into the league necessarily, and like you say, and then have to be able to develop it. And that's another archetype, right? You give me a true 3-and-D wing. I thought OG Anunoby was probably the third most important player in that Knicks-Pistons series. Some may disagree with me. Brunson and Cade were 1 and 2, whatever order you want to put them, fine. But in my opinion, they were the most important players. I thought OG was next because of his defense on Cade and how hard he made Cade work, and then his ability to make shots on the other end. And if I remember right, he didn't even have a crazy efficient series, but he had some big games. It is such a vital archetype, and it is kind of crazy to me sometimes there's not as many it seems like the best shooters then don't have the defensive aspect of it, right? There is two parts of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. I watched OG a lot in college because he went to my alma mater, Indiana, and he was a very athletic young player, but he developed that three as he went along, and I agree with you. He's a very valuable player. He would have been a perfect fit for the Pistons if they could have worked out something to acquire him.
Listen, I already had somebody sit, I've had people hey, what names are you looking at? What do you think? Who's the guy? What would you want to do? And I had OG come up, and I understand why people bring him up, because if the Knicks get just blasted in this series, I think a lot of people expect some sort of change in New York. I just don't think he's the wing that would get moved if New York makes a move. So, but yeah, he's a great name to bring up that would be an awesome fit on this team.
Oh yeah, and I think I agree with you. I think they know what they have in him, so he'd be tough to pry away. At this point, I think it was when he went away from Toronto that was the time. But yeah, I'd love to have him on the team. He'd be a perfect fit. But hopefully they can continue to develop some of these young guys. But Bryce, that's great stuff. This was another really interesting conversation. We'll have to pick it up at some point in time here and talk more about the archetypes. I also want to talk about the draft with you, with some of your draft coverage, because we'll be turning that up once we get closer to the draft season. But we really appreciate you coming on the show and giving your expert analysis here.
No, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. I always enjoy it. The time always goes too fast. We only got one segment last time. We got two this time, and it still seemed too short. So I appreciate you guys very much. I always enjoy coming on. I hope that you and all of your listeners, both of you and all your listeners, have a great evening.
Thanks. You too, Bryce. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks to Bryce Simon. Great stuff. Always good energy from Bryce. We'll have him back on the show here soon, hopefully. We're going to turn our attention to the draft, though, not the NBA draft, but the NFL draft, because there was a lot of interesting things there. We're going to have a lot of Lions pundits, since we have so many on the show, give us their thoughts in the coming weeks. But we're going to have Ryan Roberts of A to Z Sports, a national pundit, give us his take on the Lions draft and other draft things he found interesting. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. We're happy to turn our attention to football here. As listeners know, we cover a lot of football, especially Lions during the season, but we also do a decent amount of counter intel on some of the other teams. So we wanted to bring in a national pundit to talk about the draft here. So we're going to bring on Ryan Roberts of A to Z Sports. And Ryan, to give you a little bit of clarification on this first question here, at the beginning of the show, we announced that it's National Hoagie Day. And so I've been asking all the listeners what their favorite hoagie is. So do you have a favorite hoagie?
Oh man, that's a great question. I wasn't expecting this. This is a tough one. So I'm here in Jersey, and it's kind of Wawa country. So most people would probably say kind of like Wawa hoagie. I'm actually a big fan of Primo's out here. I don't know if there's a Primo's around that neck of the woods, but they have a hoagie called a Chicken Diablo, which is chicken cutlet. It's like buffalo cheese, and then you can get lettuce, tomato, like all that stuff on it. So if I can go a little bit off the wall of one, I guess I'll go with the Chicken Diablo from Primo's Subs here in Jersey.
I like that. A little plug for Primo's too. I don't know if any of our listeners will, but if you're out in New Jersey, go check out Primo's. I feel like the chicken cutlet is a good answer for a sub. We don't have that as much in the Midwest, but I think that's more of an East Coast thing for a hoagie.
Yeah. I mean, we got variety here, but I don't know. I think I'm kind of more of a warm hoagie fan. Like, I mean, just like deli meats is cool. Like, I can, put down a turkey sub or whatever it is. But for me, like I think that the chicken, the breaded chicken, the chicken cutlet is always. I feel like it's kind of hard to go wrong there. Like it's pretty hard to mess up something that good.
I knew I was going to like you, Ryan. We got the same name. We're talking about hoagies. I'm going to get in trouble with my producers here for talking too much about food. This is a trap I fall into in interviews. We have a doctor that we bring on that analyzes Lions injuries for us. In the first 5 minutes, we inevitably talk about food at the beginning of the interview. So I'm glad we could start off on a roll here with that, but we'd be wasting your expertise if we didn't move into football. But that's a great start. We're now 2 for 4 on the hoagie question here. So we got
and like you said, we have the same first name in common. So I mean, great first name.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. It was a popular one during our era, I think, too. So but yeah, appreciate you joining the show, because I'm curious to get your take. You know how this goes in the sports radio world. You kind of get inundated with the takes in your own market. And so I was excited to get you on and get your take on not only the Lions, but some of the other drafts that you found interesting, but get kind of a national take on what you liked and what you didn't, and kind of run through the picks here with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm excited to do it. I mean, we've been rolling through, we covered division by division. That's kind of how we broke it up. So I thought that this was a great opportunity too, to just kind of talk about the entirety of the division, because it was a very interesting one. I mean, across the board, I kind of just thought overall the entirety of the division, with the Lions included, did a pretty dang good job. And I think the really interesting part, especially when we kind of dive into Lions picks, is so many picks that I would just say like are on brand, right? Like we talk about like what does a Dan Campbell guy look like, right? What does a Detroit Lion guy look like? Well, there were several selections just in this draft that I would just be like, that's what a Dan Campbell guy looks like for me. Like that's it.
Yeah, it looks like the mugshot of Tate Ratledge that's on all the NFL.com pages. That's what it looks like. I feel like that's what you'd imagine. What the beat writer that we had on, Jeff Risden, that we had on last week, he was talking about how that was like an Eastbound and Down thing going for him. But yeah, I did like the picks as well. And like you said, you have to get your. I think that's one of the things I want to talk about with you since you cover the NFL as a whole. It's interesting to see the different mindsets of these general managers because Holmes definitely has a type. Holmes and Campbell have a type, like you said, and they get very dedicated to their type and they get sold on certain players, whereas there are other teams. I remember seeing a piece on the Ravens GM. That's one that comes to mind. I feel like the Eagles are pretty good at this, where they go with more kind of the best player available, go with a lot of traits, and that's how you end up with, say, like a Mike Green in the second round for Baltimore, even though he had the off-the-field issues. So you have to get in the mindset of Holmes. One of the common things here in the Michigan area is, hey, we trust Holmes. He's got a good track record, but then there's a lot of, oh, I didn't really see that coming, or, oh, we gave up this much to trade up in the middle rounds. Then you kind of question, and then you see in a year or two, oh, okay, that, turned into Amon-Ra St. Brown in the third round.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that one thing, having talked to our guy here at A to Z Sports that covers the Detroit Lions, we would talk a little bit about like draft philosophies just in general, because there's so many different organizations that just go by the beat of their own drum. Like the LA Rams is an interesting example of a team that doesn't do top 30 visits, right? Like they don't go to every All-Star game either. Like they do things very very different, kind of off the wall. And like the Cleveland Browns are one that like have the age guardrail in the top 100, and there's different teams that subscribe to different thresholds on offensive tackles. Like it's really fascinating. And one thing that I've talked to Mike Payton, who is our A to Z Detroit beat writer, is he talks a lot about Detroit will, of course, every team would like to hit certain thresholds, right? Like an arm length for an offensive tackle, speed for a wide receiver, like all those little intricacies that we talk about. It's always nice, but he's been telling me, like, and I've learned it over the last couple of years that I think it holds very true, is that Detroit just kind of they're looking for personality, right? Like they're looking for a player that does kind of like fit the culture that Coach Campbell is building ultimately, right? So I think that they're a team that's very unique in that I think they'll mortgage a little bit of, arm threshold and like that type of stuff, like that standardized scouting lingo for guys that do fit their tenacity, their mentality, their aura around their program, which is just super interesting. And I think that's honestly, like, I don't think there's one guy, I'll put it like this, I don't think there's one guy looking at Detroit's draft this year that isn't a tough guy, right? And like, that sounds so cliche and it sounds so just like blanket statement, but I mean, it matters ultimately, right? Like, what is Detroit bred on right now? It's bred on being really physical on both lines, especially in the offensive line, being able to run the football and being able to out physical a team ultimately, right? And I think that was the big thing is, what did the Detroit Lions try to accomplish this draft? Coming out of it, clearly, in my opinion, they tried to get more physical. Like, and that goes on the offensive line picks. Tyleik Williams right at the top on the defensive line for Ohio State. I mean, even in Isaac Tesla, who I think was overdrafted comparative to where he probably should have been, he still is a tenacious kid that will block his butt off, that will play special teams. And you have the offensive line picks, you have the defensive line picks, you have Dan Jackson, the safety right out of Georgia, which is like, that is a Dan Campbell safety if I've ever seen one. So I really think that they wanted clearly to get more physical because, I mean, call it what it is, man. I think they were a bad football game away in the playoffs last year, away from potentially playing the Eagles. And if they win that game, and I think they could have beaten the Eagles last year in the playoffs, then they'd probably win a Super Bowl. Like, I think that they would have at least had a very good chance to beat the Chiefs potentially. So I think they wanted to get tougher. They wanted to continue to get more physical. And I think that's ultimately what they accomplished in this draft.
Oh, yeah, and they were in good position because, like you said, they were a legitimate Super Bowl contender. They were the favorite until very late in the season. They obviously had all the injuries. You don't want to use that as an excuse, but it is part of the explanation, and they're trying to get some of the depth in there. And yeah, I agree with you that they had a very Detroit Lions draft that we're getting used to, which is get some value that makes pretty good sense up front, and then in the middle rounds it gets a little adventurous and there's a trade. And that's one of the strategy things I want to talk with you about, because it seems like the one, I don't know if it's even a criticism, but the other side of what I see with Holmes, I trust Holmes. I'm a bit of a draft junkie. I like watching all the process, but one of the things that I see with Holmes that does frustrate me a little is that he is so good when he's armed with picks, and he has a tendency to cannibalize future picks in order to get the current guys. I'd love him to do a bit of a trade back every once in a while, because I know I've heard they had the opportunity to do that with Tyreek Williams. I think that was a good pick, and I do see kind of the drop off there at defensive tackle, but it is a perfect example of, man, if you just had a little bit, if you hadn't traded last year and left yourself, because whenever he leaves himself a big hole in the draft, I know that he can't sit there through all those picks and just not trade back up, because he's never been able to do that.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating when you kind of look at the background, obviously, with Holmes being a LA Rams guy. I mean, Les Snead out there has made a living off of being like ultra aggressive and not always, it's kind of the same thing you're saying, right? Where he doesn't always value at least the top end picks, right? Like he's more of a guy that kind of hits on day 3, late day 2, early day 3, finds good football players, but then he'll trade away all his first round capital. And it was a running joke for years, the F the pick stuff to find veterans. And ultimately, in some years, they were like, man, the Rams had like 5 or 6 draft picks. Like it just wasn't a great time to obviously like break down a draft. I mean, similar to like Minnesota this year, where I think they only had 5 picks, and it's just kind of like, you can't really appropriately grade a draft that small. But I do understand the frustration. There's no doubt it is a very unique style, because I think most guys, because I mean, you just said you're a draft junkie, I'm a draft junkie, and for me, it's like I want as many picks as possible, especially in this draft, because I think this draft, while it wasn't a first round heavy draft, most teams had between like 9 or 10 true first round picks, true first round grades this year. They did have there was a lot of day 2 value in this draft. Like you can go from round 2 to round 4, even inking into 5. I mean, there were some really good picks even in that range, where you said like that day 2-ish value was the big part of this draft. So yeah, trading back I think would have made sense. Interesting if maybe if the board fell a little differently and like a Jackson Dart was more in like the 28 range and the 25 range. Is Detroit the team that they want to trade back for ultimately? Because like that's the tough conversation, is like, yes, ideally you would love to trade back, but then there also has to be a team that wants to trade up. And I think I was listening to a Howie Roseman interview. It was like a behind the draft sequence, which was pretty cool. And I actually think that they called the Detroit Lions to try to trade up potentially because they wanted to get Jahad Campbell and make sure nobody jumped them, was kind of the pulse that I got. And I think that Detroit was just very set on Tyreek Williams, for better or for worse. That was the guy that they ultimately wanted. So it's a fascinating conversation, because I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong style. It really is just kind of what fits for you. But I definitely understand, like in this draft especially, I would have liked to have as many picks as possible, because I do think that there was a lot of value to be found in the mid-rounds, not as much value in that early portion of the draft, obviously.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. And I want to pick up there after the break, talking about going down each pick and then talking about that strategy and kind of where everybody fell. But great stuff so far from Ryan Roberts. We'll come back with him after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Ryan Roberts. It's been great stuff here so far from him. Yeah, I want to go pick by pick here. You already talked about Tyreek Williams a little bit, but it seems like a classic. Once I saw him get picked, because I was talking about this with Jeff, how there can be, and I'm sure you see this, Ryan, there can be a little bit of a groupthink thing that goes on for as much analysis that happens with these with all the pundits like yourself. There are some things that get kind of aggregated, and then, you see, oh, this person's saying this about this guy and this position. And I feel like that happened with the Lions with the encouragement to take an edge in the draft. Yep. And once they took Tyreek Williams, and then especially after they took Ratledge, I kind of saw their strategy develop a little bit, where it was like, okay, defensive tackle in their eyes may be a bigger need because McNeil's not going to start the season. Reeder might be gone after the season, so they're going to need a succession plan there. And they have a tendency to kick out some of the smaller defensive tackles and make them a larger end and kind of fill that need by drafting the defensive tackle, which was stronger in that spot for what they look for. So I'm curious about your take. I know I did watch your NFC North review, and I know you were fairly high on him.
Oh, I love Tyreek Williams. I mean, just first and foremost, I thought he was the most undervalued player in this draft from like the media side of things. I know the NFL liked him. Like if he didn't go 28 to Detroit, I don't think he gets past Buffalo at 30. Like I think that was just right around the range that the NFL really liked him. He is one of the highest floor run defenders in this class, maybe the highest floor. Like he's 329 pounds. You can't uproot him in the run game. Incredibly physical at the point of attack, strong hands. Like he is he's a butt kicker in the run game, and he's got penetration upside. Like you saw it a little bit more earlier in his career, not as much later. But like I do think that he's a good enough athlete. He is linear, so he might never be like a huge sack threat. But I do think he has more tools to potentially be better in the passing game than he is right now. But you're drafting this guy to be a run defender. Like that's what you're doing at pick 28, especially. But it's fascinating that you mentioned the edge thing because I had been back and forth. I had mocked interior offensive lineman at 28. I had mocked interior defensive lineman at 28. I had mocked edge defenders at 28 because it just, for me, when Aiden Hutchinson's healthy, and I know he's coming back from the injury, but when he's healthy, he is one of the best defensive linemen in the NFL. And the thought process is, and it's similar to like number 11 with the San Francisco trying to get a Michael Williams, is try to find somebody that is enough of a threat to be able to get him more one-on-one opportunities. And most people's minds go to, let's get him a bookend on the other side, an edge that can really take pressure off him. But you can do it in multiple ways, right? Like Tyreek Williams at 329 pounds is going to demand the attention of multiple blockers a lot of the time. Like he just is from his natural size and physicality. He's going to do those types of things. So he is going to offer an Aiden Hutchinson more one-on-one opportunities. He is going to give Aleem McNeil more one-on-one opportunities. He's going to allow guys like Jack Campbell to be able to run free from his second level as well. So I just think he does so much of the dirty work that I love with him. I really do. I think he's going to make Aiden Hutchinson better. I think he's going to make Aleem McNeil better. I think he's going to make Jack Campbell better. I think he's going to make Marcus Davenport better. Like he's going to make all of the defensive linemen and linebackers better around him because of just the attention that you have to give him. If you're going to give him a one-on-one opportunities, then you're not going to be able to run the ball. Yeah, like you're just not going to be able to do it against the Detroit Lions, I think, in 2025. Because I just think he has that high of a floor as a run defender, and I just think that he makes everybody around him so much better.
I totally agree with you, Ryan. And I think defensive tackle has been a sneaky big need because of all those things that you're talking about the last 2 years. They picked up Reeder to fill some of that gap, but obviously he's not going to do a lot of snaps here at this point. He's not going to log a ton of snaps. He's basically at about half the snap count. You've got to fill in for McNeil, and you've got to fill in for him eventually. And when either of those guys was off the field, the drop-off was huge, whereas some of those guys either maybe shouldn't have seen the field as much or would be kicked out to end. So it's a good argument there both ways. But want to go to Ratledge. I feel like there was a point when you were talking about Tyreek Williams that you basically could have been explaining Ratledge from the offensive side of the ball, and then you started talking about more specific defense, but I feel like it's somewhat similar from the offensive side.
Yeah, I think it really is. I mean, I think those picks are parallel to one another for what you're trying to accomplish ultimately, right? Like obviously you have the needed offensive guard after letting go of Zeitler this offseason. Like you needed an offensive guard. I know Christian Mahogany did some good things this past year in like filling opportunities, and your interior is still strong. But I do think that Tate Ratledge, he personifies everything that we've talked about with what a Detroit Lion looks like. Like that's the guy, with the mullet and everything. Like he looks like a Detroit Lion, and ultimately I think that he offers you a lot more upside than I think people are going to give him credit for, because he's still the 57th overall pick, so it's still pretty high capital. But there was a world that he could have been picked a little bit higher before the season. Like there were a lot of NFL teams. I think there were still NFL teams that liked Ratledge a lot, but he was banged up a lot this last year at Georgia. Missed a couple games, like even down the stretch of the season, like the Notre Dame game, the playoff game. Like he was just really banged up, man. Like in actuality, he probably should not have been playing. and the film I don't think was quite as good as it was in 2023 because of that fact. But big, physical, better mover than you think as well. I mean, he tested well. I think he moves well laterally. So whether you're a team that wants to be a heavy power scheme team or you want to be an inside, outside zone team, I think that he could do a lot of different things, working laterally to the second level, all that type of stuff. So he's a scheme versatile guard that I think continues your identity, right? Like at the core of what Detroit wants to be, in my opinion. Obviously, you cover them a whole lot more than I do, but at the core, they want to run the football with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Like, that's their identity, and then everything else works off of that, right? Like, Jared Goff is so much better when he has a running game behind him. Like, that's just kind of been the book on him in his entire career, even dating back to the Rams days. So I think that he just is an identity continuer. I think that he is going to fit very well inside, of that, and continue to create what, like, one of the big reasons that Detroit's been so good offensively. I know that, Ben Johnson was obviously a great offensive coordinator, and Jared Goff's a good quarterback, and the running backs are awesome. But I really think it's the offensive line. It's Penei Sewell and all those dudes up front that have been the linchpin of this team now for a couple of years, and I think that Ratliff kind of preserves that and makes that offensive line a sustainable product, in my opinion.
I agree, and with the Frazier pick later on too, it's the same identity. You talk about the run identity a little bit. I was, as Scadaboo was dropping, I was a little bit worried that they were going to try to go after him, given the running back depth, because that profiles as a perfect line, but they just don't. They don't need that role at all with the depth at running back, and they had other needs. But I do want to talk about Tesla before we get out of here, because that's kind of that was the big discussion. He's a local kid here to where I do the radio show from. I actually spoke to him before the draft, and when I was interviewing him on the show, I told him he profiled as a Lion. That happened earlier than I thought. That was before he had a top 30 visit, and obviously we didn't expect him to go in the third round, but you can kind of see why the Lions were interested in him. But as you referenced, Ryan, they gave up some capital to get him here.
Yeah, they give up capital, and I just think he was just a little bit too early, in my opinion, for Tesla. Like, I think there's a lot to like about him. Everyone always talks about how much does the draft process really help players. Well, he is he's a guy that obviously transferred up to Arkansas, but he is the perfect example of how can a draft process help you. It helps him go from probably more of a mid-day 3 pick to a guy that ends up going number 70 overall and going top 100, top 75, because I really think that it was the fact that he did well in the circuits. He goes to the combine, tests really well. He's a great interview, obviously. He doesn't have off-the-field character concerns. Like, he was just kind of one of those guys that I think just continuously stacked good, check. He's that type of guy. And I think at the right value, a lot to be excited about. I mean, he's a height, weight, speed guy. There's developmental upside there. Big yard per catch guy this past year at Arkansas especially. And he's a guy that I think his best football is still in front of him. And the great thing about him, too, is that he gives you a baseline. Like, he's going to be outstanding on special teams at worst. Like, outstanding. He's going to be a core team guy. He's going to run down. He's going to be able to be on every coverage unit. He's going to be able to block. Like, he's going to be able to do all those different things that you get really excited about. He's going to block his butt off. He has that explosiveness and long speed to be able to make some plays down the field. And he's competitive, ultimately, right? So I think that there's a lot to like about Tesla. I just think, again, with the capital that you gave up and the draft capital that you spent to draft and just overall, I do think it was too early, in my opinion. Like, I just don't think that he was the number 70 overall pick in this class. Good football player, probably slightly overvalued, but he is a guy that, like you said, he fits what Detroit is trying to find. And ultimately, they don't need him to come in and be the guy in that room, because you have already a couple pretty dang good passing weapons, to say the least. So you need a guy that's going to come in and play a role. I'm just not sure that his role should have been picked number 70, if that makes sense.
Oh, I agree with all that, and I think you hit on some good points. The value part has been analyzed, and I can see what you're saying there. But it's the other part that's interesting to me. We've talked about that on this show, how basically that role in the offense is supposed to be a blocker that's okay with not getting the ball as much, with trying to feed all the other people there. It's the same with the defensive end. You want a high sack count guy, but that's not really who they're looking for. They're looking to crush the can. So it's more the identity thing, going back to the beginning of the interview. But Ryan, this is great stuff. I wish we could have you on for longer, but we've got to turn our attention to hockey after the break. But I'd love to have you back on and talk more draft and talk some of the rest of the division at some point here too.
Yeah, man. No, absolutely. You let me know when you want me to have it back on, and it's just a lot of fun. It felt like I blinked my eyes and 27 minutes went by. You know what I mean? So this is a great conversation. I very much do appreciate it.
Good. Well, yeah, I felt the same way, and we'll pick it back up, and then we'll try to have you on a day where there's another food-based national day, so we can
A lot
ask
of
you.
good food in Jersey, a lot of good food in the tri-state area.
Exactly. So we gotta pick that up with Ryan here next time. But yeah, appreciate you coming on. We'll look forward to having you on again soon here.
Absolutely, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you a ton.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. Take care. All right. Thanks to Ryan Roberts. Great stuff there. We're going to turn our attention to hockey. We're going to bring on Tyler Kuehl of the Daily Faceoff, and he's going to take us through his thoughts on the Red Wings and the upcoming offseason for them. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on Tyler Kuehl of the Daily Faceoff. He's going to take us through his thoughts on the Red Wings. But Tyler, we've been starting all the interviews in kind of what you may deem an odd fashion, but we have seen that it's National Hoagie Day, and so I've been asking everybody what their favorite hoagie is. So I bet in 1,000 guesses you wouldn't have guessed it. That's my first question. But do you have a favorite hoagie?
I don't think so. First of all, thanks for having me on today, Ryan.
Of course.
Not really. I'm more of a, when it comes to those kind of sandwiches, like the long sandwiches, I'm more of a toasted guy. So if you get anything with a lot of cheese, a lot of ooey gooey provolone or something like that with a nice toasted bun, you're going to have my attention for sure.
I like it, like a pizza sub kind of thing, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'm a big grinder guy, too, so I don't mean to take away from the hoagies, but I'm a big grinder person.
I like it. Similar category. We've been talking about maybe having like a hoagie draft, but we could also have a sandwich draft because there's a lot of different types of sandwiches.
It'd be like a 64-team field. Like, it'd be bigger than the NCAA tournament.
And it would get heated, too. People would get mad about the sandwich. I can't believe you chose this sandwich, the grinder over the cold cut or this, So, but yeah, we figured that would be a fun one. We're going to hear what Rex's is at the end of the show. Hopefully he's working on his, but we want to get your hockey expertise here because we were covering hockey pretty steadily here during the year. And we had a lot of other coverage to turn to with the Pistons going into the playoffs, the Tigers season starting up. But I'm curious to get your takes on the Red Wings as a whole because it was kind of an up and down season. Obviously, they had the coaching change that seemed to have a positive effect. They were very streaky and had some high win streaks once McClellan came in. And now it's a big offseason. It's interesting because somebody was talking to me about Yzerman the other day, and he was joking, should Yzerman get fired? And I have actually seen some different headlines about that. I think that's kind of quick to that, but Yzerman's not used to this kind of adversity either, so it'll be interesting to see how he responds. He's got a young team, and he's got a lot of talent coming up through the pipeline, so I'm curious how you kind of take in this season and how the approach to the offseason looks for you.
Well, if you asked me in October, could the Red Wings make the Stanley Cup playoffs? And my answer would be 100%. On paper, that Red Wings team, this Red Wings team, was good enough to make it, even with the question marks in goal, with the question of would Ville Husso be good enough, and where would Cam Talbot and Alex Lyon be? I would have thought that they would have at least snuck into the playoffs. Granted, we had no idea how good the Montreal Canadiens were going to be in the second half of the year. We didn't know if that was going to be a playoff team. We didn't know if the Ottawa Senators were going to be for real, and they proved to be. The Atlantic Division, I mean, the Central Division, we've seen them beat the crap out of each other in the playoffs, but the Atlantic is such a wild card because you don't know who's going to get hot at the right time, right? So I really thought they had it. I thought Lucas Raymond was starting to come along, having Patrick Kane back, bringing in the Stanley Cup champion of Vladimir Tarasenko. I thought they had all the right pieces to finally break the schneid and get back into the postseason. But like you just mentioned there, they were a very streaky team. They went on that losing streak in December and ended up costing Derek Lalonde his job. They bring in McClellan. They start playing, in his words, some effing hockey. That was his line once after a couple of games that he saw with the team. They started playing well. They went on a couple 7-game win streaks, and they were one of the hottest teams in hockey and almost creeping up into the top 3 in the Atlantic Division. But they just couldn't find the consistency, or if there was consistency, it was they were consistently good for a couple weeks and then consistently bad for a couple weeks. And that's what really hurt them. It's what hurt them the last couple of years. I mean, they've shown that they are gearing up to be a playoff team, but they just have a losing streak at the wrong time, and it's always late February, early March. And you look back at the outdoor game, at Ohio Stadium, the Stadium Series game. Going into that, they lost to Columbus the game before, but they were just coming off another win streak, so they thought, all right, maybe they get a few wins heading into the trade deadline. Stevie Y makes a couple of additions, and boom, they're in the postseason. Because at that point, they were right there in the wild card picture. But they lose that outdoor game. They lose it in pretty tough fashion. I know a lot of Red Wings fans are still angry about how that ended. Not just the fact the Michigan team lost at Ohio Stadium, even though the football team hasn't lost in a few years. But the point being is that kind of, I think, changed the mindset of Steve Yzerman, saying, all right, maybe this team's not good enough yet to be a buyer at the deadline. And the team was really never able to recover. They were kind of there. They were kind of in that spot, but they just weren't good enough yet. And unfortunately, while they were still kind of in the running towards the end, they just didn't have enough runway, and the goaltending wasn't there. The scoring kind of slowed down, and while people thought maybe they were going to have another late surge like they did last season, have it come down to the final day, Ryan, they just didn't have the juice, and it's setting up for a lot of question marks, a lot of interesting thoughts. And I know people in Hockey Town wouldn't believe they would get rid of Steve Yzerman, but today, for example, the Los Angeles Kings just got rid of Rob Blake, and he's put together an LA Kings team that's made it to the playoffs 4 years in a row. They've had to play Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers 4 years in a row, so that hasn't helped. But that just shows you that even if you can be a winning team, teams are willing to make decisions. I mean, even though they said mutually parted ways, it sounded like the Kings wanted to go in a different direction than what Rob Blake wanted to do. So long story short, if you aren't winning to what the ownership standards of management, the upper echelon, wants from you, they might make a decision. But it's going to be hard for getting rid of a guy like Steve Yzerman in Detroit. So, yeah, Ryan, a lot of question marks heading into this offseason for sure.
Well, and you hit on a lot of good points in that, talking about how, just a few things kind of breaking the other way. But one of the things that I thought was interesting over the course of the season, and it was brought to light by some of the comments that Larkin's made, but you have the trade deadline. You talked a little bit about that, how maybe there were some things that happened that encouraged them to not be as aggressive. But to look at the totality of it and look at the beginning and see that Wallman was traded essentially as a negative asset at the beginning of the season. And then you go into the trade deadline, and it seemed obvious that they kind of needed some defensive reinforcements. Your eye is much more trained to this. You follow a lot more hockey than I do, but I assume that that's how you would feel, that that's kind of the position of need at the break. And then you watch them trade for a deep line forward and another goalie, which I've made this joke, I think, to every hockey guy that's come on the show, because it's like, hey, either I don't getting all these goalies that are kind of like that occupy kind of the same space. They're not necessarily that much better than the other guys in the room. So either give me a lineup that's all goalies, or try to work it out so there's actually a goalie that is excelling in the net. Otherwise, I want like the Mighty Ducks style all goalie lineup to roll out there to at least have some fun. But it was odd to see them move. I understood moving Veleno, but then to move him for the assets that they did, and then see Wallman then get flipped for a positive asset. Those two moves concurrently were tough to swallow.
Yeah, and the thing with Wallman is he went out and simply had a career year. He went to a bad Sharks team right off the hop and played pretty well, and enough to attract the Edmonton Oilers. And now he's playing good, solid minutes for a team that's in the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. So I'm sure he's not complaining about his situation anymore. But, I mean, yeah, the defense was an issue for sure. And you mentioned the goaltending. And a couple years ago, I think it was when they had Reimer and they had Husso, they had, the three goalies up top, like, we have three solid goaltenders, right? And, it could help out. And with Alex Lyon, too, like, it's a good problem to have depth. But when you're not playing them consistently and guys are sitting in the press box, or even, having come down to the minors here in Grand Rapids, it's not a winning formula, because goaltenders get cold. They need to be in a rhythm. If you want a number one goalie, you can't have him play twice a week when you're trying to do this rotation that the Red Wings have kind of got themselves stuck in over the last couple of years. And And with having Talbot having one more year and Mrazek being on one more year, unless Yzerman can make a move this offseason, maybe at the draft coming up in June, you're going to be looking at another situation where you have two goaltenders that can be good at best, but unfortunately Mrazek's on the back nine of his career. I mean, we all remember his prime years in his first stint with Detroit, and Cam Talbot is certainly towards the end of his time and whatnot. And we got a guy here in Grand Rapids, it's Sebastian Cossa, that's kind of unfortunately fallen into a bit of, I don't want to say complacency, but his development, because he's been stuck in Grand Rapids and hasn't had a chance to really show himself in Detroit. He's kind of tapering off, and that's not good because Cossa is supposed to be the goalie of the future. I mean, there are decisions that have been made. I think Yzerman has earned criticism for in a way, but you can see what he's trying to do, and you have to remember when he was in Tampa, he had guys already there that were drafted before his time. Steven Stamkos, Victor Hedman. Yes, he drafted Andrei Vasilevsky, and that's obviously panned out well for the team, but he was able to construct good teams that got to the playoffs. He acquired a guy like Ben Bishop. The decisions, though, I think he doesn't want to make. I think it's almost like he doesn't want to make the wrong one, because he did learn from some mistakes. He had a couple bad years in Tampa, but they were always a consistent threat to make the playoffs. Ever since he came to Detroit, he's been trying to do a full-blown rebuild, and he really never had to do that in Tampa Bay. So, he's been kind of learning, and I think he does. I think Yzerman, and I'm not going to speak for Steve Yzerman because I know that even though I've met him a couple times, he's a great guy, but great to me. But I can tell you, it's not an easy job to have, to try to rebuild a franchise from the years of the strain Ken Holland put by getting rid of draft picks just to make the playoffs. And I think that Yzerman doesn't want that to be the case. But at the same time, you got to start winning. I mean, they've been in LCA now, this beautiful arena, state-of-the-art arena now for 7 years, and they haven't made the playoffs once. And the Pistons have made the playoffs more times than the Red Wings have in that building. So that's kind of something that I'm sure Yzerman knows, and I think there's even more pressure on him this year to make it happen for 25-26.
Oh yeah, I was talking about that the other day because I feel like the rising tide of the other teams here in Detroit has put more pressure on the Red Wings tangentially, because then people go, oh, wait a minute, the Pistons, who we thought were the worst team, actually just had a very competitive playoff series with the number 3 ranked team in the Eastern Conference, and the Red Wings, we thought were going to make it. They were 1 point out last year. They lost via tiebreaker. We thought they were going to make it. So, yeah, it does put some pressure, and some of it's just from fans and some of the reporters and stuff, but I do think they're feeling that pressure internally, like you're saying. But I want to pick up the conversation about the goaltenders as well after the break. So we're going to come back with Tyler Kuehl. He's given us some great analysis so far. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Tyler Kuehl of Daily Faceoff. Tyler, you hit on a lot of interesting points there before the break, but yeah, I guess the goalie conversation that we were having is kind of a codicil of the wider conversation about the Red Wings, because there are a lot of prospects that we hear about here in Grand Rapids and in other places. We've had a lot of people cover the prospects that are in the system. We're seeing them on the world stage and in different areas, but the goalie conversation seems to, I haven't heard anybody say what you said about Cossa, that he's kind of tailing off because maybe we're missing his window a little bit, and it would have been nice to try him rather than to go with the veteran guys and, like you say, not allow them to get hot. A lot of the other folks have been saying that he's maybe not ready, but I'm kind of with you that, like, okay, if we know these aren't the goalies of the future, this guy's got to get some experience at some point.
Yeah, and it's funny, I was on another show a couple weeks ago. I can't remember. I remember I was talking to him because we asked about Cossa, and let's be honest, the first half of the American Hockey League season, Cossa, he earned his all-star bid. He was fantastic, and it looked like he was on the right path, and of course he made his NHL debut, albeit under strange circumstances, in that win against Buffalo, but he looked good, he looked confident, and it looked like, all right, this is the up and up. But I had to try to kind of waver the expectations of, I'm not going to say Cossa's a bust yet, because some people have already started to bring up that conversation, but I kind of said, I'm like, listen, guys, it took Jimmy Howard 4 years because he came to Grand Rapids right after the NHL lockout in '05, and it took him 4 years to become a full-time NHL guy. The difference for Jimmy Howard was, at that time, the Red Wings only had really ever 2 goaltenders up with the big club. It was Hasek or Osgood, or it was Conklin and Osgood. So if anyone went down, Howard was going to be able to go up there and get some time in the NHL. That was something that he really benefited from. So when it was time for, when Conklin moved on and he got that chance in 2009, 2010, he was ready to go to be maybe not a number one guy, but to be able to be an impact player, and ended up taking the starting job away from Ozzy. Kosa, unfortunately, now we're in year 3, and he, or at least his first, this is his 3rd full year with the Griffs, he has not really had that opportunity to get consistent time in the NHL. He was there for a couple weeks and played, 2 periods. And I think that's because of the fact that you have 3 guys under NHL contracts ahead of him on the depth chart. They're going to definitely play more often than Kosa would ever get time. So I think once again, I'm not going to say if I was Steve Yzerman or not, but I would like to see maybe having and if you do have to keep Talbot and Mrazek because they have 1 more year on their contracts, fine. But just keep it to those 2 guys. So if one of them messes up or gets hurt, Kosa can get that opportunity in the NHL, because I remember I interviewed him around the All-Star break because I asked him about complacency, because, I was a former goaltender. I know what it's like to play well, play high levels of hockey, but then get sent back down. And sometimes that can be tough mentally on it, especially a young guy. He's just turned 22 years old. He's still a young kid compared to some of these guys that are playing in NHL right now. So he still has time to grow. But he even mentioned, I got to be worried. I got to be concerned about complacency, because I know that if I want to get to the next level, I can't be that. So I think for him, it is a mental game. It's been tough for the second half of the entire year for the Griffins here. It's not just Kosa, it's the whole team. But unfortunately, it's made Kosa look a little bit more down, and I do believe his confidence has been shaken a little bit. He's not even playing in the game tonight, Game 2 of the playoffs against the Texas Stars. Jack Campbell's the one getting the start because Kosa had a tough Game 1. So I think if the Red Wings want to do this right, I think you got to find a way to get him some more time in the National Hockey League, and because you have a guy like Trey Augustine that's going to be coming up here soon too. And is that going to be challenging a guy like Kosa for the top prospect spot, if you will, or will Kosa already be up there, and then him and Augustine can be the guys of the future? That's only the future will be able to tell.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to bring up. You hit the nail right on the head as far as Augustine goes, because and you might have to help me with the 3rd goalie, but I know there's a 3rd goalie roaming around the depths of the minor leagues and the prospect system for the Red Wings that has been pretty good as well, but not necessarily headed to the big leagues anytime soon. But it's the idea that you have 2 guys that are on their way out, like you said, and you've got 2 guys that will need ice time. And what is the value? You got to kind of do a math equation at some point, because you say, okay, Talbot and Lyon didn't get us over the top this year, and now we got Mrazek in there, and are they going to get us over the top? Probably not. Whereas how many more losses are we going to have with these young guys? Even if we do have a few more losses, we've got to get their time started, because they're going to have the opportunity to grow in the roles, and they're going to have to come up at some point, because we don't really have a succession plan other than that.
Yes, and that's the hard part, and that's where I think Eisner has to really make a decision here of, go out this offseason, get a number 1 goaltender. It's looking like there's going to be some goalies available. I don't know if there's not really going to be many big names available, so you're not going to have that game changer of a guy come in probably. But if you get the good, unfortunately, to try to compare it to Mrazek here, but he looked like a Vezina caliber goaltender when he was with Carolina. But that's just because they have a good defensive system down with the Hurricanes under Rod Brindamore. But if you can put the right guys around him, and just to get a number 1 goalie that can play consistently and find good enough minutes, and then have a more definitive number 2. I know in the NHL nowadays you have a lot more 1A, 1B. You're not going to see guys outside of maybe Connor Hellebuck and a couple others play 70 games in a season. But you just need to find a way to have Kosa know that, hey, if something happens, you're ready to go. Instead of saying, all right, if A, B, and C happen, then you can get up to the NHL. And I think that's with Kosa's kind of, I don't want to say him taking a step back this year, but I think that's what kind of led Augustine to stay at Michigan State because, prior to this year, the way Kosa was playing last season in 23-24, and same for Augustine at Michigan State, it looked like, all right, 25-26, Kosa is going to be the backup in Detroit. That'll open the starting spot in Grand Rapids for Augustine, and everyone kind of takes a step up. Now, everything was kind of taking a step back, it seems like, here, and maybe put that plan for the Red Wings brass behind schedule, if you will. Probably something they didn't want to have with their goaltending. They wanted guys to be ready to go, and I still think Kosa is going to be, he has the potential to be a number one guy, I believe. And I think Augustine, what we've seen from him at Michigan State and at the World Juniors on the international stage, he can be an NHLer one day. And that's a good problem to have for the Red Wings. But unfortunately, it just doesn't seem like it's going to happen tomorrow for those guys.
Yeah, and you don't want to give up on prospects too early either. That's happening now, I think, in sports even faster because there's so much more information on these guys, and we get kind of tired, or we get ADHD going, and we get our attention spans on something else, and it's like, oh, well, he's not ready yet. Well, he hasn't proven that he's not ready, that he just hasn't gotten the chance yet. So, but great stuff, good analysis. We appreciate you taking us through how things look here. We'd love to have you back on the show as the season kind of approaches here, but tell people where they can follow you in the meantime.
Well, Ryan, they can follow me at TJKU29 at I'm not going to get my email out. Gosh, that would have been a terrible idea. No, on Twitter or on X, TJKU29. That's the place to find me. And Daily Faceoff, I cover the Red Wings, but I also